Life is messy and unpredictable.
Being able to find joy in the weeds of life is so important. I'm Beth.
And I'm Kim, and we are so glad you've joined us as we figure out how to hold joy in one hand and struggle in the other.
Welcome to Joy in the Weeds.
And here we are. We are so excited for this podcast. Beth and I are having a conversation with Nicole Zasowski. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, very
Oh,
good.
okay,
Great.
good. And I have to tell you the story of how I came across, was so excited about getting in contact with you. I was listening to the Matthew West podcast, and you were being interviewed by Matthew. And within 5 minutes of your conversation with Matthew, I was like, Beth, we have to have this woman on our podcast
Aw, I'm
because
honored.
everything that Beth and I talk about is really the holding joy in one hand and struggle in the other. That they're not mutually exclusive, that they're both part of our lives. And within 5 minutes, I knew that this book, What If It's Wonderful, is all about that. So my first question I have for you is the subtitle is Release Your Fears, Choose Joy, and Find the Courage to Celebrate. So before we do that, Nicole, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I got so excited to see you. I'm sorry. My anxiety is high, so my brain is kind of cut off. So Nicole, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into your book, and we'll just see where our conversation goes.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm just so honored by everything you just shared. Thank you. Yes, I'm a marriage and family therapist. I mostly practice in a private practice in Greenwich, just outside New York City. Occasionally, I get to travel and speak to different groups of people around the country. And I live in a tiny little coastal town in Connecticut with my husband and 3 young children. And I've written 2 books. The first is From Lost to Found. And the one that we're going to talk about today, my most recent one, is called What If It's Wonderful?
And the book is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Beth was making the joke. Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, before we get into it formally, so Kim did call me very excited, and she told me, she says, Beth, there's a book. You're going to love this book. Kim and I joke, just so you know, Nicole, Kim and I joke all the time that Kim is the weeds and I'm the joy. And what we mean by that is that Kim is the first section.
Oh, I don't.
Of your section number 2. And section number 3 is all the things that we want to start doing and talking about. So we are so excited about it. I mean, quite literally, I don't think there's been anything else we've read or anything else that we have talked about that has hit the notes so beautifully about what we want to do here. We are both just so passionate about the fact that, that joy is a really important part of life. But also, Kim is always saying, but it's, you can't stop. You need to be willing to look at those, face the struggle, or kind of, I always say this, Kim loves to just sit in it. Like,
yes.
she loves to have those, just sit in it. And I am, oh, come on, let's get on to the joy. And I have to tell you one other thing, and then I'm going to stop. But when I got married, my dad is a minister, and so he was the one performing the ceremony. And I felt very brazen in explaining to him what he was and was not going to talk about in the marriage ceremony. And I told him, I said, we will do all the marriage counseling you want, and you can tell us all the terrible things that might happen to us and give us all the warnings. But I don't want any of that in the marriage ceremony itself, because that is a time to celebrate. And I want it to be all about us celebrating the love that we have, and celebrating how God has led us, and just celebrating. So my dad literally started the sermon portion by saying, we are all here today to celebrate. And
this is a celebration. I love that.
It's literally, the word celebrate has been a huge part of my life. I loved, everyone that knows me knows and will say, Beth loves to celebrate. So we have both sides here. And that's what's been so beautiful and fun about doing this podcast together is I'm learning with Kim to be willing to feel all the feels, and
Mhm.
walk through some of those things in a much more intentional way. And yeah, I'm not gonna say what I'm doing for Kim, but anyway.
You help me laugh.
And both are so important and
Yeah.
lead to
Yeah.
the other. So I'm glad that you bring both.
Yeah. My first question really has to do with the subtitle. Why do we need to find the courage? Why does celebration take courage?
Yes, this was one of my first questions when I was researching and diving into this for myself, for my own story, even before I knew it would be a book. Because most of us don't realize that joy is actually the most vulnerable feeling we feel.
Mhm.
Because holding something, a gift, good news, whatever that joyful thing is, automatically is accompanied by the possibility of loss. And in my own story, this book was born mostly out of a season that could be characterized by change and loss.
Mhm.
I didn't write it because I had a lot of wonderful things to
Mm.
say about celebration, like Beth does. Um, I was coming from it much more from this courage place. And
Mm.
when you go through loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one or a betrayal or just a season that turned out really differently than you hoped or thought it would, there's the thing itself, there's what happened, the
Mhm.
loss, and then there's the cost.
Mm,
Mm.
And the cost is the impact to our identity and sense of safety. And these are those feelings that we might be tempted not to sit in or push past. But I realized that one of the costs for me of that season was when I did start encountering more joy, more breakthrough in our story, I noticed that my joy was accompanied by a lot of fear. It felt easier
Mhm.
not to hold that gift
Mhm.
than to hold something that might break.
mm,
Mm.
And so I practiced disappointment. I rehearsed
Mhm.
disaster. I kind of kept that gift at arm's length. And I was so grieved when I woke up one morning and realized, yes, I have been through a lot of loss. But a lot of the loss I've experienced is actually my refusal to embrace the life I have right in front of me. And
mm,
that's really what motivated me to do a deep dive into the neuroscience research around celebration. What does scripture have to say about celebration? And how can I practice this in any season I'm living and not just when it feels obvious or like the natural reaction?
S Sorry. Oh, get your shovels. Let's go dig deep. Okay, because I don't. How do you do that when you've got? Because I've read the book. There's a lot of pain, like
Mhm.
in that book.
Mhm.
Um, how with the amount of pain that you were carrying, how do you find celebration in that, even though there looks like the promise of your hopes coming to
Mhm.
fruition? Like, how do you not how do you well, maybe that's the thing. How do you not have that fear? I
Mhm.
know you can't not have the fear, but I'm not sure how you can have the celebration at the same time.
Yeah, I think to begin, we have to look at what we're thinking of as celebration. I think we tend to
Mm.
think of it as a reward for an accomplishment or a reaction
true.
to good news.
Yes, yes.
And so we see our joy always sitting on the other side of a dream realized or a goal achieved, or some sort of shift in our circumstances. And we think, well, I'm perfectly willing to celebrate. I just am looking for a reason to celebrate.
Mm,
And I have to tell you, at first, I was a little bit annoyed when it became clear to me that celebration was a discipline and more of a rhythm that we practice.
Huh.
Than and certainly we all have those moments where we naturally celebrate in reaction to really great news or a gift that we've longed for. breakthrough in our story, whatever it is, but it is not limited to that. And really what it is it's a rhythm that helps us cultivate more joy in the life we're already living. And so one of the feedbacks I get on this book is it looks like a great book. I'm just not really in a celebratory season. And I would just say all the more reason to
Mm.
pick it up, because the last section, I get
Mhm.
more practical, as you know. And it was really important to me that those practices be A, doable, and B, available to someone regardless of what kind of season that they are living right now. And so we can certainly talk about what that looks like, but celebration doesn't always look like rejoicing. Sometimes it looks like rejoicing over a change in circumstance, and sometimes it looks like remembering a God who doesn't change in the midst of circumstances we wouldn't choose.
Yeah, I think that's what I love so much about my understanding, or the way I view joy, and it is that it can sometimes be so quiet and
Yes.
so deep and so still. And
Mhm.
yet it can also be jumping up and down and with glee, and there's great joy in that. But that, so I love that you also incorporate celebration in that way as well. Like to me, that's so beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah.
So when you say a rhythm, what
Mm.
what does that look like on a Wednesday afternoon?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, there's a ton of them in the book, but I'd love to talk about a
Mhm.
couple of my favorites. I think a really good on-ramp, just a simple one that has really profoundly changed my life. Not because it's a monumental, huge exercise, but because it really changes my perspective daily. But first, the practice is called savoring, but
That's the one I wanted to talk to you
oh, good,
about.
good. It's kind of like picking a favorite child, but it does definitely probably my favorite practice. Because I think it's an easy place to start and make such a big difference.
Yeah.
But before we go into that, the reason it's so powerful is because of what's happening in our brain
Mm,
already. So
mm,
left on neutral, the brain leans negative.
mm.
So all that you have to do, with the exception of maybe Beth's brain, um, all you have to do to look at the worst case scenario or to feel down is nothing. That is where your brain will go naturally. And there's a few different phenomenons going on that make this the case. The first is called a hedonic treadmill,
Hmm.
which basically means that our brain rapidly adapts to joy.
Oh,
So
yes, I remember. Oh, yeah. I found
maybe,
that fascinating.
yeah, maybe you receive good news or the gift that you thought would make you want for nothing else. And you have that moment of thrill, and then that it quickly fades into the background of your everyday life, and it leaves you wanting more.
Mm.
The second is a phenomenon a lot of us are familiar with, but it's worth mentioning, is our brains are just stickier with painful information. And your brain is very efficient. So, what
Mhm.
this means practically is when you go throughout your day, your normal Wednesday afternoon, all those moments of connection with loved ones or delight in noticing beauty in nature or whatever it is are not things that your brain thinks are important. And so it is not going to notice and keep those everyday moments of joy. And the third thing is we have this awful habit of telling our joy how it can be improved upon. So I always give the example of, say you're giving a presentation and you feel really good about your delivery. You can see you're connecting with the audience.
Mm.
Maybe you get some compliments on your way back to your seat and you sit down and you feel so satisfied. And then you start thinking, I should have used that story or that example. or it would have been better if I made that point, or they said I was a good speaker, but they didn't say I was a great speaker. We tell our joy what would have made it better. So I say all this because we need a practice that actually carves a new neural pathway in our brain toward delight, toward feeling more joy in the life we're already living that doesn't require our circumstances to change. And savoring is my favorite way of doing that. And the way that you practice this is you just ask your 5 traditional senses what they're going to remember about a moment. So what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? And what do you feel? And that celebrates that moment that your brain would be tempted to dismiss or discard. It carries it forward in a way that you can recall it later and helps you extract more joy from that moment that your brain doesn't naturally think is very important.
Basically, taste and see that the Lord is good.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I love that verse because I think it hints at the way God has made us with all 5 of our senses. And what I love when I practice this is that not all of them are very obvious. For instance, when I'm rocking my 16-month-old daughter to sleep, it's one of my favorite moments to savor. And it happens multiple times a day. But I don't want to forget it. And it's one of my favorite moments to practice this. But taste is not the first sense to obviously come to mind. And yet, when I discipline myself to do that, it's usually stale coffee. It does cement that memory differently than had I merely just, relied on sight or smell. And we tend to rely on, the more dominant senses that that are more obvious.
Yeah, you really though have to you have to be very intentional if you're
Yeah.
gonna do that at any given moment, because it's always like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
Yes, and having eyes to see those moments and keeping them small. So a snapshot. We're not. I had a friend who just wanted to savor the fact that her husband, and her 4 teenagers were all sitting around the dinner table at the same time. I'm sure the food wasn't perfect. I'm sure there were squabbles at the dinner table, but she just chose the fact that they were together to savor. So we want a low bar and we want small bites when it comes to choosing the moment. I like to practice it in the present because it helps me extract more joy as I'm living it. Some people like to do this as a reflective exercise at the end of their day. Whatever works for you. I don't think there's strict rules around it.
I love whatever works for you. Thank you.
Yes. It's always nice when that's the answer, right?
I really do. I was going to say that to pick something small is really how I would define savoring, because you rarely say that we tend to say we savor a bite.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you don't savor, like the feast per se. You savor bites at a time, moments at a time, where you're feeling the food on your tongue, and to really savor something is to just take a little tiny bite. It's not the whole.
Yeah, great point. Definitely.
So when was the last time, either of you, when was the last time you did that? Because I'm thinking the last time I actually savored, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but it was Saturday morning.
Well, tell us that story.
I can remember. Well, it was very early, Sabbath morning. I made my coffee and I went out on my swing, and I sat on the swing and I was watching the sun rise, and I could see all the colors in the sky, the pinks and the emerging yellow and the orange, and just how it like radiates, like the clouds are above and the sun just radiates on those clouds. And I tasted the coconut creamer in my coffee, and the killdeer, like we have killdeer all over the yard.
Wow.
And it was warm. Like I don't know what I was smelling,
Uh-huh.
except maybe humidity.
Uh-huh. That's a smell for sure.
But 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 that was 3 days ago,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I haven't savored anything since then,
Mm.
and that's sad.
Mm. Yeah, I think once you practice it, you see more opportunities to do it.
Yeah,
It's kind of like you find what you look for.
yeah.
And sea glass is my analogy for that in the book, because that's one of the moments that we savor as a family often. Um, and that was probably the last time I savored is looking for sea glass with my kids yesterday.
Mm.
But we find hundreds of pieces each time we go.
Mhm,
And I wouldn't say that that's common, but because we do it so
mhm,
often, our
mhm.
eyes are so trained for what the shape is, what the texture
Mm.
is, what the colors are. And we find more now than we did when we started this tradition at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think it's because our eyes are trained to see. And I think
Mm.
those moments in our lives, that are gifts that God has for us, are the same way. It helps us notice and name what is good.
Mm.
So what you're saying, what I'm hearing then is by intentionally practicing the savoring, it will come more naturally. It'll be something that we don't necessarily have to do intentionally because our brains are trained. We're training ourselves to do it.
Yes, it'll become a more natural practice. You'll also see more opportunity
More
to
opportunities.
savor.
Yeah.
So both are true.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. One of the other practices you talk about gratitude and you talk
Mhm.
about Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about both of those
Yeah.
and the difference.
Yes. Um, Gratitude has become a really common conversation in our
Mhm.
culture in recent years, and I'm so glad. I think it's a beautiful practice. It feels like you can't walk into a boutique without seeing a little gratitude journal or jar or something. And the research is clear. It does increase our joy because it does help us notice and name what is good. So we're scanning our lives for the good, and it changes our perspective on what we're seeing. And then we're putting language to it in a way that we can keep it and carry it forward. What we don't often talk about, and was fascinating to me as I researched this, is that the practice of Thanksgiving, which is actually expressing the gratitude we
Mm.
feel, either to God in our prayers or to other people in our lives, that doubles the joy that we
Hmm.
glean from gratitude had we simply felt it in our hearts. So if I leave lunch with a friend and I'm just so thankful for this person's presence in my life and the conversation we had and the way that I feel challenged and encouraged by their relationship, if I notice that and name it for myself, I'm going to feel some joy as I reflect on that. If I call her up, or I like to do it face to face, I think there's an intensity to that that's really special. But even a note, depending on what's possible, again, we're not letting the perfect get in the way of the good. But sitting down and expressing that and saying, I just need you to know the difference that you make in my life and the ways
Mm.
that I've grown and changed because of your friendship and all the many reasons that I value you and appreciate you. That doubles my joy
Mhm, mhm.
had I more so than had I simply felt that. And hopefully, it imparts some joy onto the recipient as well as they listen to that affirmation.
Okay, sorry, Beth, I've got so many
Go
by
ahead.
the way,
Go
Nicole,
ahead, Kim.
I'm an LMFT as well.
You
So,
are
yeah.
good.
Okay, so what was that phrase you used? We're not going to
Let the perfect get in the way of the
of
good.
the good.
Mhm.
Okay, the I know this is not in your book, or maybe it was, and it was in passing, but dig into that a little bit, and then
Yeah, no,
let's
it's
apply this to this.
sure. It's a great theme when it comes to celebration.
Yeah.
Because obviously, and one of my favorite feedbacks on the book is I have a really different story than yours, but this is so applicable in my own. And so I really wanted these practices and principles for people to be able to take them, put them in their pocket, and use them in a way that works for them. Obviously, there's some guiding principles. There's some things that do require discipline that make a difference. But I think with anything we practice, whether it's savoring or Thanksgiving, just because I think it's really helpful to sit down with that person face to face and share that affirmation with them by looking them in the eye, doesn't mean I shouldn't write that note to my friend who's still in California and I live across the country. Or maybe it's hard to get on the phone with the different time zones and schedules, and do what you can, and adapt these practices and principles to a way that fits your life. Because I think what increases our joy is just the practices and the disciplines themselves, and not every detail looking exactly how it looks in my story.
Yeah, because we can really get stuck in what
Yeah, and then we
think
think,
it's supposed to be.
yeah, and it's like a Bible reading plan. We think that if we're not doing it exactly
Yeah.
as the plan indicates, or if we missed a day, or we read double or half that we were supposed to because we got interrupted, that it's all for naught. And I think just engaging in God's word,
Yeah.
in that example, for instance, is we often let the details just get us discouraged rather than seeing it as an avenue of connection with God and other people.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I'm just looking for other ways. I
All right.
just look. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, while you're looking, I'll step in for just 2 seconds and ask. I like I said, the whole center of your book, I'll be honest, I'm very much a skimmer.
Mhm.
Um,
Remember, we're not letting the perfect
exactly,
get
we're
in the
not
way.
exactly. Good time to put that in here, because
Yes.
it's a grace-filled moment.
Yes.
But no, I'm definitely a skimmer, and I was so much enjoying it. But skimming, I actually listened to the first section more in my car as I was driving.
Okay.
And that was perfect for me. And then when I got home and started reading more, oh my word, the whole second section, and I know we've already jumped to the third, so forgive me. This is not in
It
order.
doesn't have to go in order.
But man, like even
Mm.
just the titles of the chapters, I'm sorry, I'm gonna read them because you all know my joy. Love lavishly. Lavish is my favorite word. I love that it's biblical. I mean, it is so incredibly good. Receive affirmation. I think one of the hardest things for all of us to do. That chapter resonated with me so much. It's been like a pet peeve of mine that somehow how we get pride
Yeah.
mixed in to the point that then we can't receive affirmation, which is so ridiculous. Joy and sadness, the dance of grace. I'm telling you, your titles were just like, this is my joy all the way through. Hope in the middle and joining others' joy. We actually did a podcast on that because like day one, when Kim and I started this, I said something and Kim expressed what my joy was creating sadness for her, and I didn't know how to handle it, and I just like ignored it and moved on. And then later I was like, I am so sorry, that was so rude. So we ended up doing a whole podcast on it. So I think that's so important. But to people who I think one of the things I enjoy so much, and I'd love for you to speak about this, you talk about the science behind it all as well,
Mhm.
and how important it is, and how I really believe we're created that joy is like working out is.
Mhm.
And that I just started working out. It's not been my thing ever. I'm about 4 weeks in to the first time in my life working out. But working out, y- there are parts of it that may not be considered, grand, right? Like
Mhm.
it can hurt, it can feel uncomfortable. It's not even like um it doesn't feel like me. And yet, man, the reward from that, it just grows and helps me be healthy and helps me feel stronger and helps my posture improve and just
Yes.
all the way across. And I'm only 4 weeks into it. Um, and I have so many times as a celebrator been accused of being superficial.
Mhm.
Mm.
And it's not superficial. I've never believed it was superficial. I've known it wasn't superficial. But
Yeah.
it's so easy to start questioning that. And I think that's what
Mhm.
appreciate so much about this, why this is so impactful for me. Sorry, I'm off camera shaking it. I'm so excited. Um, and I'm recommending it to everyone because you explain so beautifully how it's not superficial. Like, this is not just something that is, it's not about just stuffing, and it's not just about trying to, ignore all the sad things that are going on in our lives, but it's an important practice that, frankly, if I can say, God's called us to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I can't tell you how many times, like, I have seen how celebrating things or having celebration moments that are just really non-moments can change people for moments and for more than moments,
Yeah.
for forever. I mean, I just think celebrating is so incredibly important, and it's not just superficial.
Yeah, I think you speak to two really important misconceptions about celebration. One is that it's escapism, um,
Mm.
or superficial. Like, it's been misbranded as this wild party that helps us ignore our feelings. And
Yes.
escapism is a reaction to pain that disconnects us from relationships and from our feelings, our emotional
Mhm.
experience. Celebration is actually an action based on truth that helps connect us with our emotional experience and other people.
Mhm.
And so they are not the same thing at all. I may not be able to tell you which one it is by looking at the behavior. Often I get
Mhm.
that question, like,
Mhm.
well, just give me a category. Which category does this behavior falls into? We have to look deeper than that. A better diagnostic question is, what am I looking for in engaging in this behavior? Is it, am I trying to numb and take myself out and disconnect? Or am I looking to engage more deeply? Am I looking to connect and mark a moment? Um, and usually that's a more helpful question to ask ourselves. Another misconception around celebration is that it's self-aggrandizing somehow.
Mhm.
We're not sure how to
Mhm.
reconcile our
Mhm.
the invitation to celebrate with our value of humility, and so
Mhm.
we're just really quiet. But one of the chapters you mentioned, the dance of grace, David was such an example to me. The Bible story of David when they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant in, and he is just so exuberant and dancing wildly, and a lot of people, including Saul's daughter Michal, are looking upon him like, this is so inappropriate. Um, but David's dancing and exuberant celebration was not to draw attention to himself. It was because he
Mm.
recognized he was the recipient of grace. And when I read that, I realized that actually for me, it's my hesitancy to celebrate that's a
Mhm.
sign that I have made it about me.
Mm. Say that
Um,
again.
when I am hesitant to celebrate, that is a sign for me. It's a cue that perhaps I have made this celebration about myself. Because when I recognize that my gifting is from God, that my opportunities to use those gifts are a gift from God. He's made me this way, and graciously gives me the chance to exercise those gifts, hopefully to bring him glory and further his kingdom. I celebrate freely
Mhm,
because
mhm.
this is not about me.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
but when I somehow start to, when pride sneakily gets in there in my heart, then all of a sudden I'm hyper vigilant about my own moves. Am I looking humble? Am I looking
mm,
is this celebration drawing attention to myself?
mhm.
And that's just become a litmus test, a sign for me that, okay, what's my perspective on this? And nope, all is grace. This is God's gifting in my life, and I need to celebrate this freely.
Wow. That makes me think. I was looking for it. I don't know where it is. I have so many things marked, but one of the things, and I'm going to use my own words because I don't remember yours,
Sure,
um,
go for it.
is like we're told to choose joy. As
Hmm.
Christians, we're told to choose joy, but then in a sideways, not too much.
Yeah, yeah. We get a lot of messages around what's appropriate with
Yeah,
celebration, and
very mixed
yes,
messages.
and I think even that choose joy can be loaded. This is not about toxic positivity.
Right.
This is
Uh-huh.
not about expecting the joy to cancel what is hard,
Yeah.
um, or take us out of what is hard. It's about acknowledging that both are true and can sit in the same room together, and that
Mhm.
God is present and working in both places. Sometimes choose joy doesn't look like our typical,
Right.
like we were saying earlier, picture of what joy is. Sometimes it's quiet, it's remembering. I think for me, when
Mm,
I look at that invitation to celebrate when I can't rejoice because something tragic has happened, or I'm just in a season that's really
mhm,
hard, often it looks like remembering
mm,
God's faithfulness to me in the past, remembering who he is and his character and what is true about him, even when life feels so wildly unpredictable. Um, and I think for me, that's what choosing joy means.
mm,
It's drawing close to him and accepting his invitation, in to grow or to be close with him in that moment, or to reconcile a relationship, or to step into a new part of our healing that we've been afraid to look at. Whatever that is, that's what it means, for me to choose joy. Um, and you bring up such a good point that it's not this fake it or make it, or
Mm-mm.
toxically positive, but it's about letting pain and joy sit in the same room.
Through the whole time I was reading your
Mhm.
book, and I don't know if you practice Sabbath, but most of the people who listen to our podcast practice the Sabbath,
Yes.
and I could not help but think that the Sabbath is exactly that.
Yep.
The Sabbath is everything you just said. It is a
Mhm.
it is a discipline. I use the term very
Yep.
it's a ritual. It's a rhythm in our lives where one day out of 7 we stop and we celebrate everything that God has done for us. That is really what Sabbath is. It's the celebration of all of Jesus.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
No, one of the things that was so powerful for me, was looking at the rhythms and rituals of celebration in the Old Testament.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and some, whether they were celebrated every 50 years or every
Mhm.
week, once every
Mhm.
7 days, I noticed that they didn't happen because the Israelites had accomplished something
Right.
big, or because they were in the mood to celebrate, or because the work was all done and they wanted to reward themselves. Every single one of them happened in rhythm.
Yeah.
They celebrated because it was time. to
Yeah.
do so. And that kept the celebration connected to God's goodness
Right.
and not a reward for our
Right.
own.
Right. Because all of those celebrations are what God did.
Yep.
Either his deliverance or the completion of his work or whatever
Mhm.
it was. It's all in response to him. And
Mhm.
then it's time to celebrate.
Yes.
I I've also always loved that when Jesus was baptized, that when God speaks and he says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased," and yet Jesus hadn't done anything yet.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
It wasn't about
Great point.
what he had accomplished,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but just this is this is my son in whom I'm well pleased, which I think is so important as parents and, as friends, is to celebrate one another, not because of what we've done, but just because of who we
Just
are.
because. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges we have as parents in a world that we celebrate more naturally around
Mhm.
the little league wins or
Mhm.
the A's on the test, and
Mhm.
to celebrate personhood over performance is
Mhm.
so important. And please continue celebrating those fun moments.
Yes.
But to celebrate who they are,
Mm.
like, I just love the way God made you, and here's the gifts I see stored in you. What gifts do you see?
Mm.
That's a conversation we try to have with our 6-year-old.
Mm.
I want them to leave my home knowing that who they are was worthy of celebration, and yes, the way they got to use their gifts too, but also just who they are as people.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way we can do that with more than just words.
Mhm.
Because not everybody's love language is words of affirmation. So it's like, I wonder how sorry, it's just where my brain took me. It's like,
Yep. Yeah, I think
what what that looks
celebration, I had I need to debrief this with her, so I'm kind of speaking out of turn here, but a dear friend of mine just read my book and she was about to lead her first retreat. I'm not exactly sure what brought this group of people together for the retreat or if there was a theme around the retreat, but she had tweaked some things after reading my book. And one of them was they threw every single person there a surprise birthday party. And I'd be surprised if it was any person's birthday during the retreat, but just having it be not a
Yeah.
lavish celebration that's not connected to a reason,
Mm.
I think is part of celebrating personhood. Like, we just love you,
Yeah.
and we don't need a reason to say it,
Yeah. Right.
um,
Right.
or to show it.
Right.
Some people's love language is more acts of service or gifts,
Mhm.
not attaching that to a reason or a reward or
Mhm.
a reaction to any particular thing, but just, hey, I just wanted to do this for you, thinking
Yeah.
about you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really neat. That's really neat. I'm going to read you a quote that I found this morning as I was wasting time on Facebook. Um, it just went away from me. Hang on, I got to find it. Oh, listen, you may love this. It's Andrew J. Bauman, who is also an author. We tend to stay away from mourning and dancing, too afraid to cry, too shy to dance. We become narrow-minded complainers, avoiding pain and also true human joy.
Hmm.
While we live in a world subject to the evil one, we belong to God. Let us mourn and let us dance.
Mm, that's
Isn't that
beautiful.
beautiful?
Yeah, it makes me think of, I think I talk about this verse in one of the last pages of my book. It makes me think about that verse in Revelation. We will conquer by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And just, yes, let's be honest about how God has moved in seasons of struggle and seasons of pain. And let's also be honest about how he's moving in seasons of joy and our victory. I think um, we are doing ourselves and our community a disservice when we get quiet around our celebration.
Mhm.
Again, remembering it's about God's movement, not ours.
Right.
And let's give testimony to the ways that He is moving in joyful ways in our story, in both honesty around our pain and honesty around life's joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Well, we could keep going, but we want people to read it.
Yes, we really do. We really do. It is so, so, so good. It's called What If It's Wonderful? Release Your Fears, Choose Joy, and Find the Courage to Celebrate by Nicole Zasowski.
Nicole, how can they find you, and where would you like for them to get the book?
Yes.
You can get it all kinds of places, but where would
Yes,
you like
you
for
can
them to
buy
get
it wherever you like to buy books. Obviously, it's available on Amazon and can be at your doorstep quickly. And I'm sure your local bookstore can order it for you if they don't have it. You can connect with me on my website. I love hearing from listeners and readers. That's just Nicole, Nicole, Zasowski, ZASOWSKI.com. And you can still download a ton of free resources that accompany the book, including, those table topic cards that
Mhm.
Yes.
are in those boxes. So I have printable versions of those
Oh, that's
with just
fantastic.
fun questions ranging from light to deep, for your own celebratory gatherings in your own homes. That's just one thing that's available. So definitely check that out on my website. And I take email subscribers to coffee. I send you virtual coffee cards. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I'd love to take you on a virtual coffee date when those come around. And I hang out on Instagram the most in terms of social media platforms. And I'm just at Nicole Zasowski there.
And you're a good follow.
Oh,
I follow you on Instagram.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome. Well, so whenever we do a podcast, we always end with the same question
Mhm.
every day, and we all answer it, all three of us. So the question is, in the last 24 hours, what's something that's brought you joy, laughter, or a smile?
Okay.
We
Who's going first?
You can go first if you have one. If not, Beth,
or
you
we
want
can
to?
give you a second.
Yeah, I have a lot, so I'm just trying to see.
Oh, a lot is good.
Yes. So my son, my second child, is just barely 2.5. And just the way, like if I wrote down the phrase, it wouldn't necessarily be an exceptionally funny phrase, but just the way that he says stuff is just so hilarious and sincere. And he is really, we have a great relationship and he loves his mom, but he is so into his dad right now. And his dad left to go to a hockey game yesterday. And he just sat down on the couch and kind of looked forlorn. He goes, I love my daddy so much every day right now. Just the way that he says stuff. And he's got these blonde curly hair. And I find myself like, I just can't wait to hear what you're going to say next.
That's awesome. How fun.
And he's just really fun right now.
That's really fun.
Awesome. Kim?
Beth? Oh, okay. Yesterday, my daughter, who's 29, and I went on a date to Barnes & Noble yesterday, which is her
Aw.
favorite thing to do, and I'm getting ready to take basically a month of vacation. So I bought several books to read, and it was just a nice time. We got to spend an hour and a half in the bookstore, and that was really a lot of joy.
Yeah, that is a joy.
All right. So I have so many. I would like you. I have a whole list I was trying to choose from, but we had some friends that were here yesterday and they actually spent Saturday night at our home, and they have a little 5-year-old son, and we have these snowballs. Have you guys, if you don't have the snowballs, the fake snowballs, they're made out of, I don't know, some kind of white puffy stuff, but
Yeah, those are great.
they're super soft, but they actually crunch a little, like when you squeeze them. It's craziness. Anyway, we bought those for our grandkids a while back, and it's one of the few toys we brought to the apartment when we moved. And anyway, he found those and got them out and was just running around our apartment with that beautiful child giggle cackle that was just deep in his gut and he just could not stop. And he and my husband were just having the grandest snowball fight in the living room with us trying to, we're talking and having adult conversation, and snowballs are just flying past our faces.
Oh, what a gift.
But his little laugh was just such pure joy. And I don't know that I savored all the senses, but I remember at some point stopping and closing my eyes and just listening to that sound. I mean, there is something so glorious about that sound. So
yes, agreed.
Yeah.
That was my joy.
Love that.
And Nicole, I love when things, I'm going to cry. When things change in my brain. And reading your book and this conversation is putting me in the mindset to savor, to savor daily, or even more than that. But I'm really going to make that change on purpose. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, what a kind thing to say. Thanks for giving me that feedback.
Yeah, it's this has just been a transformative book for both of us.
And I'm so thrilled to hear that. Thank you so much.
Obviously this is a topic very dear to us because we've devoted a lot of time to it. But even so, there's so much richness in this book. When Kim first was telling me about it, I'm like, oh, perfect. It'll be great. All the things we talk about. Well, it's what we've talked about for those of you that listen, and so much more. And so please, please, please go get this book and read it and let it make a huge difference in your life as well. So feed your soul. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thanks,
It
Nicole.
was so worth the wait. We had a bunch of bumps along the way, but we're so glad you're here. And
thank you, friends. I'm so glad that this conversation happened when it did, and really grateful for you both. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's been such a joy. So, all right, if you are out there in the midst of the weeds, feel the feels and go experience some joy.
That's right.
Practice some joy. Practice celebrating. Oh, forget all that. Just go get the book.
Yeah, right.
And you'll be doing it all.
It will help you do both.
All right, bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would really love to hear from you. So please find us. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Joy in the Weeds. You can also email us. Our email address is joy@carolinasda.org. That's joy@carolinasda.org. Now, we hope that today, as you navigate the weeds, you will also hold on to moments of joy. This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.